In this video, I want to talk about one of my absolute favorite techniques. It's one of the only ones that I keep with me in my boat no matter where I go in the country, and that is a drop shot. I love a drop shot, but there are three big mistakes that I have made over the years, and mistakes that I see that guys that get in my boat who also make that I think really prevent them from catching a lot more fish on a drop shot. And today I want to talk about those. Now, real quick before I do want to let you know that there's only about a day and a half left over at Omnia Fishing where you can get all of your terminal tackle for 25% off. This is a great way to save a lot of money because we all know how much terminal tackle costs, things like tungsten weights and a lot of different hooks. So guys, I'm gonna leave a link down below in the description. Click on that link, go over to Omnia, and actually all you're gonna do is put in the coupon code terminal25 when you go to checkout, and you can get 25% off your terminal tackle. It's a great deal. All right, let's get into this video. Now, to me, a drop shot has a really special place in my heart because it was the first, I won a tournament. My first tournament I won outside of the state of Ohio was on a drop shot. That was a college event actually up in New York. And the first tournament I ever got a top 10 in a Bassmaster Open as a boater was also with a drop shot. I love drop shot fishing. It's a great way to catch not only smallmouth, but largemouth and spotted bass. It's one of my favorite techniques. Now, with that being said, there are three big mistakes that I want to discuss in this video. And the first one is something that I used to do often, and I see almost everyone who gets in my boat do the exact same thing, and that is imparting way too much action on a drop shot. That is by far one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of anglers make. You see a lot of guys, they cast that bait out. This is something I did as well. Cast that bait out, and as they're dragging it kind of back to them, they're just jiggling that thing just the whole way back. They're just kind of really jiggling that bait, really imparting a lot of action, just doing a lot. That bait's down there, just moving all over the place, going crazy. And I'm not saying that that's not going to catch fish from time to time, but if you think about a drop shot, it's a finesse technique. So usually a bass that's going to bite a drop shot and no other bait are the ones that you kind of have to trick into catching. They're the ones that may have seen a lot of other baits. And so when you're imparting a lot of action into a drop shot, to me, if a bass eats that, more than likely that bass probably would have also ate other techniques like a jig or maybe a Texas rig, maybe baits that you could have used higher pound test or something where you didn't need a drop shot to catch that fish. But to me, when I finesse fish, I'm trying to catch a fish that is very not wanting to bite. They have that good old lock jaw. They're maybe a little bit more lethargic. And when you impart a lot of action into that bait, it tends to kind of scare that particular fish away. The first time I ever saw this is when I got whooped in my boat. I was like 14 or 15 years old. I fished up on Lake Erie with an angler. And we were actually vertically fishing a drop shot at the time. I actually cast a drop shot a lot more these days, but we were vertically fishing it, and I would watch him. He would let his bait drop about 25 foot of water and just sit there. He wouldn't move his rod at all. The waves were kind of going up and down, and he would the only thing that he would do is make sure that his bait wasn't moving with the waves. I would drop my bait down, and I'm sitting there jiggling it on the bottom. And he was catching fish night and day better than I was. It was very substantial. And I remember him saying don't do that. And I'm like, don't do what? And he's like, don't put that much action into your rod. You don't need to sit there and jiggle it. And that, as soon as I stopped doing it, it was a light switch. I started catching fish. And guys, I've seen that a number of times out on the water. A number of times. I fished with one of my uncle came up here from Florida. He was fishing a drop shot behind me on Lake St. Clair, putting a lot of action to that bait. I was dragging it really slow, catching a lot of fish. As a matter of fact, I caught my biggest smallmouth that day, a 6-pounder. But that's a big thing, guys. I really believe you don't want to put a lot of action in a drop shot. You want to cast that bait out and just kind of drag it along. Keep it down there. Let it really soak down there. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about, another big mistake, is overcomplicating our drop shot baits. And this one, I don't fault an angler for this because there are hundreds of thousands of different drop shot baits. And not to mention a drop shot, like you could put any type of plastic you want on a drop shot. I've seen guys that drop shot tube baits and beaver style baits. So it's very easy to just overcomplicate what you put on a drop shot. And I'm here to tell you that like 90% of the time that I fish a drop shot, probably 80% of the time I fish a drop shot, I am fishing a straight-tailed worm. Just a simple straight-tailed worm. And I love, specifically, you could fish any drop shot worm you want. Specifically, the ones that I like are the robo worms. This is something that I learned from Aaron Martins. He always pushed the robo worm. And that's a bait that I've picked up and I have not put down. And I really like just a 4 to 6 inch robo worm. And I'm gonna use it in like really obvious colors, the ones that always tend to work, like green pumpkin is a great one. Another thing, if you guys have not used the color Margarita Mutilator, it's like a darker purple color. I'm telling you, that one is a great color to use. And side note, that violet, that dark purple color is actually one of the colors that a bass can see the best in deeper water, which is why I think Margarita Mutilator works so well. Now, the only other bait that I really use often is what I'm gonna call like a minnow style bait. You know, this is kind of like a small fluke style bait. There's a number of these out there on the market. And when I'm using that bait, most of the time it's when I'm up north and I'm fishing for smallmouth, when I know smallmouth are eating like oweye or even gobies, things that, and most of the time that's gonna be in kind of like a bait fish color, kind of like a smelt type color where it's kind of like a pearl on the bottom with a little bit darker back. Maybe it's darker brown, darker green. That's all I really do though. Those are really the only colors and lures that I fish when it comes to a drop shot. And I've had a tremendous amount of success no matter where I've gone in the country with those baits. Now, let's talk about mistake number 3. And this is a big one. And this is one that it kind of took me like a little bit of a while to grasp because I didn't really understand it for a while. And it's actually pretty simple. And you may have already seen this out on the water, but the big mistake here is I see a lot of guys that use way too heavy of a drop shot weight. And like I said, this is something that I did for a long, long time because when I was first getting into drop shot fishing, I fished it anywhere from 10 feet of water to 25 foot of water. And I didn't want to have to switch out my weights all the time. So what I did is I picked up like either a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce size, and that's all I used. And I would just cast that bait out and I would just use it no matter how deep of water I was in. And the thing about using a bigger weight on your drop shot, especially if you're casting a bait and dragging it back to you, it doesn't matter as much when you're vertically dropping it. But when you're casting a bait out and dragging it back to you, which is what I normally do, if you watch this in a pool, you will see that your line as you're dragging it, because you're dragging a heavier weight, is very taut. It's not moving. It's a very taut line. And because of that, that worm that you have on your drop shot doesn't really have kind of that natural movement in the water that those little currents usually make it have. And so I'm not talking about like an aggressive action. I'm just talking about a more natural action here. And when you have a heavy weight, it doesn't allow that bait to kind of move more freely in the water. And this is something that I really learned a number of years ago while fishing on Lake Champlain. I had been fishing a 1/2 ounce weight, I had been fishing a 3/8 ounce weight primarily in this tournament. I was fishing 20 foot of water, 20 to 24 foot of water, catching a ton of smallmouth. And then we had a day where it completely slacked off, very calm. The calmest day I've ever seen on Champlain. It was literally not a ripple in sight. And I stopped getting bit on that drop shot, but I could still see these fish on 2D at the time. I would still see these fish below the boat. And so I still knew they were there. And I made a switch from a 3/8 ounce to a 1/4 ounce, and it was immediate. It was immediate that I started catching fish. And I didn't switch up the bait. I didn't switch up my leader. I simply switched the weight that I was using. And it just, on that really calm, slick day, it made that bait look a lot more natural to the fish. and I started getting bites. And so that was when I really learned and really grasped this concept of using the lightest weight that you can get away with on your drop shot will help you to get a lot more bites. So guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you picked up something about a drop shot. If you want to watch my most recent video, you can click it right here, and I will see you tomorrow.